the photo. I'm sure there'll be other instances once this group puts together its public communications and outreach efforts. There'll probably be more and more of those things as time goes forward, people wanting to follow along what we're up to. But we are reconvening now the afternoon session of the meeting, and what we're going to move into now are a couple of areas of experience. And of course, we in California have to be cognizant of what might work in Washington State or what might work in Oregon, may not necessarily work in California. So we certainly understand that. But these two next presentations are going to give us some perspectives to which we could really see what these guys have learned over the last number of years. And kicking us off is Rima Griffith. She's the executive director of the Washington State Transportation Commission, and she's here today to provide us an overview on Washington's efforts regarding the consideration of a road charge program and kind of share their policy and, planning efforts. She's been leading the Washington Steering Committee since the effort began there in 2012. So, Rima, we want to thank you very much for being here, and hope that you continue to advise us and give us your perspective from all that you've learned. So, welcome. Hit the button in front of you there. There you go.
There, I'm probably, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excited to be down here, and we are very happy to see the state of California moving in this direction. It certainly is a game changer, I think, for the nation, not just the West Coast. Oregon and Washington, obviously Oregon's been at it a lot longer than we have, and together we can make some noise, but it's great to have a partner like California join us in this interesting endeavor. So for Washington State, let's see, there we go. Little bit of background on why we're even talking about it up there. Probably share some of the similar reasons, but we also have some unique financing situations. Washington State, as this chart indicates, over the next 13 years, about 70% of our current state portion of the gas tax is obligated to pay for long-term debt in our state. And as you'll see by that red line going across the chart, we've got a pretty, we're plateauing right now, and this assumes that our legislature doesn't pass another gas tax and bond it. Their practices have been, we've been fortunate that they've had the leadership to raise the gas tax twice, in 2003 and in 2005. And each time they did it, one was a nickel, one was 9.5 cents. Each time they did it, they bonded all the revenues at about 95%. There's a lot of reasons and logic why they would do that, but it unfortunately ties our hands for 30 years in terms of financing the state's transportation system. So the difficulty in interacting with our citizens is trying to explain why we continue to have revenue challenges when we have seen taxes for gas go up in the recent past. So we are in a little bit of a dilemma, and so that is one reason that our legislature felt motivated to drive us to start looking at something else. Oops, I went too far. The other dilemma is more common amongst all of us. And this chart just kind of shows that basically the pace of our fuel economy improvements in our vehicle fleet is determining the risk. And in our view, it's not a matter of if, but when we're going to need to make a transition away from a tax revenue system that is based on consumption. You'll see the green chart represents fuel consumption, the red represents VMT. Based on state forecasts, we've got some dotted lines that provide alternative viewpoints that are a little more pessimistic, fold in some of the national data. Our state forecast does not independently forecast miles per gallon for vehicles. So that is a inherent risk in the estimates that show a little more perhaps positive or less threatening decline in the revenues. But so we offered our legislature a little bit different viewpoint. In 2013 in our state, the average MPG was 19.5 gallons. It's hovering, right around there to 20 right now. In 2040, though, we're showing it going up to 27. We feel these are very conservative estimates. We think it'll be a lot worse than this, but we wanted to at least try to be in the ballpark of what our state forecast council has been telling them. As you can see, the alternative suggests 34.3, which is probably more in line with what national data is estimating from various sources. So we came up with this great cartoon icon. We thought everybody could relate to the frog. When we talked to legislators, the challenge is imparting urgency. And we've got at least a political environment in Washington that is rather reactive. Unless there's a real problem that's happening or imminent, it's very difficult to impart urgency and encourage risk-taking in this kind of discussion from a political standpoint. So it's been very hard to get their attention because actual data right now on consumption is pretty flat. We're not seeing consumption tailing off. We're not seeing our revenues dropping off the charts. So it's very difficult, and they kind of have to take your word for it because then what we have to do is start resorting to forecasts, which can battle each other. Those are all, based on the assumptions you're making on the numbers. So those can easily be discredited if that's what you want to do. So it becomes really a challenge to have some judgment and ultimately to show leadership in trying to foresee what's coming if you just kind of look at the tea leaves a little bit. So we believe that, foresight and leadership is a must. We can't wait till there really is a demonstrable problem, because then it's going to be too late. It's going to take us a long time to think about a transition if that's the policy decision. And so we want to impart this kind of slow, deliberative process that we're encouraging them to take. So as I mentioned, we've been taking a very sequential manner in how we've done this. They've been very cautious. In 2012 is when it started. They directed the Transportation Commission to assess the feasibility of transitioning from a fuel tax to a road usage charge. They created in statute the Stakeholder Steering Committee. And the outcome of that was, the bottom line is, yes, it's feasible, but we identified a whole bunch of policy issues that are very sticky, and it creates what we call the wicked problem that won't be fun to solve, but they are solvable. In 2013, we went back and reported to them, and they then directed the Commission to evaluate the business case. Does this pencil for Washington on an estimated level? And the steering committee remained in place. The outcome of that was, generally speaking, yeah, it will pencil, it made sense, and the policy framework was established as far as the things we need to continually address as we work through this idea and peel back the onion of the problem that we're trying to face and trying to identify a program that may move forward. So in 2014, last year, the Commission was directed to develop a work plan that refined and advanced the policy work and the analysis, which is a continual work in progress, and to develop a concept of operations. We also were directed to continue our work on financial analysis of the concept of operations. I will say back in 2013, we actually were able, in that business case analysis, to look at not just gross but net revenues. We had a process where we actually drilled into not just the cost and the gross, but we actually want to know how it netted and then compared it to gas taxes. So a compelling argument could be shown over time what would happen if we make a lot of assumptions on the vehicle, the transition of the vehicle fleet in terms of MPG, and where the gas tax would go in terms of consumption. So basically they told us, all right, go come up with the concept of operations and redo your financial analysis based on that. And the steering committee continued its role. Also, they asked the Department of Transportation to work with the Western regional states in it's called the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium, made up of multiple states, to look at the interoperability between travel between the states. So they took that issue on. And then they asked our state treasurer to assess the implications of modifying or replacing the gas tax. Since we like to bond in Washington state, that's a big question for the legislature is, well, wait a minute, if we get rid of our gas tax ultimately, what's that mean for us in terms of our financing options long term? I will say that the Commission and the Treasurer have been cautioning the legislature to stop doing the bonding practices that they have been doing. We have recommended that they go to a cash flow basis, or the Treasurer has alternatively offered maybe a 50% bonding level. But clearly we've got to get more on a trend of cash flow and less reliant on debt so that our hands aren't tied in the future as they are currently. So you might ask why the Commission was put in the lead on this. The Commission, just real quickly, is a seven-member body appointed by the Governor. The members come from all over the state. 4 are from west of the Cascade Mountains. That would largely be the urban Puget Sound metropolitan region. And 3 are from the east side, so we get more of a rural flavor from those members. And the responsibilities are, they're really the only body in Washington state that looks at the whole transportation system. And not just the state-owned system, but the cities, the counties, the regions, and how it all fits together by mode. They serve as the state tolling authority, and they set toll rates on all the toll bridges and highways and the express toll lanes. That's created an interesting predicament for them because in this work on road usage charging, we have been really trying to be clear that it is not tolling. It is not a form of tolling, and we're not looking at it to be a form of pricing. That makes people really nervous and concerned about what the ultimate agenda may be, and we really have characterized it, per the legislative directive, to be a replacement for statewide funding for the highway system. We even go so far as to say it should be constitutionally dedicated, like our gas tax is, for highway purposes.
So Rima, you're actually calling it a replacement and even contemplating making it constitutionally protected?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And if anybody else has any questions, I don't think Rima minds any interruptions.
Interrupt me.
Please.
So that's been a challenge because they are kind of known as a tolling authority, and so it's common that people will draw that connection. Like, that's why they're doing it. They're thinking about tolls. They're thinking about congestion pricing. Certainly, a road usage charge could have those aspects in the future, but that is not our intent or our agenda. And so we've been trying to be very clear with the public, separating those two worlds. Tolling is a facility-based approach that we've used to fund multi-billion-dollar projects where it's feasible and you've got the volumes to do so and you don't have diversion challenges. This is more of a statewide tax that would be assessed holistically on all drivers, and therefore is not about a specific facility, about generating revenue for the state.
I had a quick question. What is the gas tax rate in Washington?
37.5 cents. It's a flat rate fixed on the per gallon.
And just as another question, is it contemplated that what you folks will impose will be voted on by the public, or will it be just imposed by the legislature?
We hope it's just imposed. We don't. Typically, they have been more prone to do referendum, but we hope it will be a direct direction. That's yet to be resolved, though.
Okay. Thank you.
The Commission also sets fares for the state ferry system. We have a very large ferry system, and so they handle the policies and rate setting for that, as well as they handle the 20-year state transportation plan. They do a tremendous amount of public outreach and education, so they've got that aspect in the channels to talk to the public, if you will, as an independent body. So the challenges of change, when we think about, this is really a paradigm shift. It's long, it's tedious, it's challenging, and it's got a lot of misinformation, a lot of myths, and a lot of reaction and fear embedded in it. And so it's an ongoing conversation that we have to have, both with our state leaders and really ultimately with the public who will finally decide this. The way to attenuate this, we feel, is through ongoing education and communication. Some of the issues that we face, of course, are fairness and equity, privacy, choice, security, cost effectiveness, sustainability, and, of course, interoperability with other states. Education and expertise building is critical, and as part of that, the legislature established the 25-member steering committee, which would be synonymous to what really the role you're playing. It's made up of 8 legislators and various stakeholders representing a variety of interests. The steering committee reports to the Transportation Commission and has 3 primary responsibilities: provide advice and guidance on the assessment of a potential road usage charge, provide advice on whether such a system merits further exploration, and provide advice on guidance on the development of future work plans and directions. So they really are doing the heavy lifting and the hard work, and then they report to the commission, who kind of listens, and because we have 3 commissioners on the committee, we have a direct involvement of our commission as well. We tried to be as inclusive as we could. The challenge was the balance of size versus getting everybody around the table that we needed to. That was a challenge. And over time, though, we look at the members of this steering committee as being our advocates, our mouthpiece. I mean, they don't necessarily have to love road usage charging, but by keeping them at the table, for us, it's been now 3 years, we're all learning together, we're all asking the hard questions together, we're all hearing the same answers, and it's been a really interesting discussion and evolution around advancing this, because everybody's got their own perspectives and they have their own constituencies that they have to consider as they think about their involvement and what they're going to say about it. So far, remarkably, even though we have some strange bedfellows around the table, everybody has stuck together. There has been a unanimous support of every report that's come out. There has not been any divergence yet, but we still have a lot of detail to get into, and I suspect when we get into some of the details on how the money is used and how it gets allocated, we might see a little bit of separation occur. So just real quick, the committee membership, as I mentioned, 3 commissioners. We have 8 legislators on the committee, 4 from the Senate, 4 from the House. Chairs of the transportation committees are on it. We also have representatives from the auto and light truck manufacturers. Kurt Augustine, who's in the audience from Sacramento, actually participates representing them, and he really gets the gold star. He's flown up to Seattle for every meeting. It's been great. He's had a great level of input from the manufacturer viewpoint. We also have folks from the ports, the environment, the counties, cities, trucking, public transportation, DOT, Department of Licensing. We have a motoring public representative, which happens to be AAA, the business community, user fee, technology, and the Treasurer's Office, of course, when we think about financing. Our communication approach has been very constrained, I would describe it as. Our legislature really wanted to take a slow, deliberative, somewhat controlled approach at this. And so we were actually literally told not to go out and do press releases and bang our drums about what was going on, because we were entering it so cautiously, and we just didn't know if this, and I will honestly say, we don't have unanimous support by any means of our policy leaders on that this is the right way to go. It's very tentative, it's very cautious. We do have champions and supporters, certainly, but there are a lot of skeptics. There are a lot of people that still, are waiting to decide. And so we were told to take it slow. And I will say initially we were concerned with that, because the natural, I think, tendency for the commission anyways, they want to get out and talk. They want to engage the public soon. They want to start the debate. But the risk was that really becomes a distraction from perhaps the academic, if you will, discussion around the merits of the proposal and the possibility of transition. And so in hindsight, it probably was quite wise to go quietly the first couple of years, because we didn't have the distraction of the media. We didn't have the challenges coming forward that would somehow perhaps impact the direction and the ultimate decision making. We were able to get into a room. We didn't by any means hide these meetings. They were noticed. We have to notice them publicly. But we didn't do public press releases, and we certainly didn't do a lot of noise about it. So it allowed the steering committee, with a small audience, to really focus on the work and focus on the merits of the policies and debate them. And that's been good, because we haven't been put in a reactive mode yet. We have been able to be very careful and calculated about what we talk about when. And so ultimately the lesson we've carried forward is you only talk about what you know when you know it. Of course, the media, in the beginning, we did proactively engage the media some. We met with the editorial boards and gave them just information, tried to start educating them about why we were even looking at this from a funding challenge standpoint. And they appreciated that, and they held back, because there really was nothing to report yet. We didn't have an announcement to make that we were changing or something was happening. It was just, well, it's being studied. So they did hold back a little bit. We've had very positive press coverage occasionally, kind of reporting on where we're at. And on the bigger issue of funding, which is good, the tone we wanted to impart was we've got a funding problem long term, and our infrastructure is crumbling, so how do we fix this? When we want to do the right things by getting high-efficient vehicles on the road, we want to get clean burning vehicles on the road. Those are great policies to have, but it endangers our funding for transportation infrastructure. So we've got a conflict in policy that we have to reconcile. And that was the tone we took initially. When we got asked by reporters and media kind of some prodding questions, they wanted to know more, like, when is it happening? What is it going to be? What is it? What's this new thing going to be? Is it a tax? And we really resisted to answer those questions. And that's hard to do, because when you get asked something, you want to answer it. But we had to be trained to kind of hold back and only talk about what we knew at the time. And that continues to be a challenge, but I think it's allowed us to have some very positive, productive discussions with the public so far through the media outlets. So in phase one, we took very limited interaction. It was just, as I said, just kind of some briefings. Phase two, it's been more reactive in nature. We continue to do, through the steering committee members and commission staff and DOT staff, presentations to interest groups that'll ask us to come and just talk about what we're doing, similar to this. We do that. And this last year was the first year that we were kind of cleared to start doing some surveying and taking the pulse of the public on kind of very high level. Do they perceive a problem? How do they feel about the gas tax? How would they feel about a per mile tax? And we also gathered a whole lot of data on the state's vehicle fleet makeup. The Department of Licensing has a lot of data, but we wanted to get the perception data from citizens on a household basis, if you will. So asking people to tell us how many cars their household had, because we think about this from a consumer cost standpoint. People don't think about me driving my car. It's about me and my husband and my 3 kids, and we all have a car, and now I'm paying for 5 cars. And so we wanted to expand that viewpoint a little bit. And so we gathered a whole lot of data through, the Commission has an online survey panel called the Voice of Washington State. It has about 100,000 citizens signed up to participate in online surveys. So we deployed a survey. It took about 45 minutes, and it was very tedious and boring, and it asked a lot of questions about, tell us about your first vehicle. How many miles per gallon do you get? How far do you drive? And we had them report on each car, and surprisingly 8,000 people participated in that survey and gave us their data statewide. We got statistically valid samples by county. So we were able to take that data with a fair amount of confidence and apply it forward in our analysis, thinking about urban and rural analysis, the difference between urban and rural dynamics and implications, and it will carry us forward in our future work. So it was an interesting endeavor that gave us raw data that we need for our analysis. But then we also did a survey this fall that focused more on the policy and the perceptions of fairness and equity. And on that urban and rural impact, we were able to basically extrapolate an understanding of the true impacts. We took the vehicle fleet data and did an analysis. And what we learned was what it really comes down to is not where you live, because gas is also obviously a consumption-based tax. The more you drive, the more you pay. The same thing is true with the per-mile tax. The more you drive, the more you're going to pay. So when you set that commonality aside, it really becomes a factor of what you drive, what kind of car you drive, and the impact it will have on you based on the kind of vehicle you drive. And what we found was in rural areas, by having the vehicle fleet data, we were able to see that in more typically rural counties, where you have a higher predominance of SUVs, a lesser occurrence of hybrids and electrics. In the urban areas, we saw a much higher occurrence of hybrids and electrics and a smaller number of the large gas guzzling SUVs, and older vehicles as well tended to be more in the rural counties. And so what that really meant was, at the end, the rural drivers were probably going to see a reduction in their costs. It's not huge, but it would be a reduction in costs for their transportation. In the urban areas, or, I guess I shouldn't say that, but people driving the more high-efficient cars, whether they're hybrids or electrics, would probably see a slight uptick because they're going to start paying more than they are currently on a per-gallon tax system. So that's helped us start to have that conversation about trying to take away the urban and rural pitting each other against each other, and it's really about what you drive. So that was enlightening and useful. We're just starting to kind of share that data. We also, on the policy side, talk to people about their perceptions of gas tax. Do they think it's fair? Do they feel like it's too much? Do they pay too much? And what we learned is people know it, and so they're really comfortable with it. And it's bundled. They don't see it. They don't feel it. They pump, and then the price is on the tank, and you're probably using a credit card, and you leave, and you're not seeing even a receipt that says how much you just paid in state gas tax. So it's not a conscious charge. So it's kind of invisible, and so I think the level of acceptance and comfort and perception of fairness is pretty high because they don't really have anything to compare it to. So they felt it was fair. When we asked them how they would feel about a per mile charge, immediately we had a very negative reaction. Majority of respondents didn't like it, and that's to be expected. It's new, and we didn't explain anything. These are what we call uninformed questions. It's just, how would you feel about paying by the mile? We then, later in the survey, did what we called informed questions, where we then introduced a sentence on the gas tax and the sustainability issue. And then on the road usage charge, we talked a little bit about the equity and just what it is. Really stuck to the facts. Didn't try to put any opinions in that setup. And then asked them how they felt. And we still didn't get majority support, but we watched the needle jump about 9 percentage points just on a little sentence saying what it was and how it would work. And so it really, I guess, was a little bit positive to us because we felt, well, while we know this is going to be a heavy lift, it seems like with some education and ongoing communication, we can impart some understanding and gain some support for a transition to something like that. So we have a long ways to go, but that's been a lesson learned for us. The other thing we've kind of learned in this process is it's really critical to have a communication plan and to have speaking leads throughout your state prepared, to have people identified, and to have your message really laid out and consistent. It gets really dangerous. There's a lot of words we like to avoid using and because it can be misleading. And there are ways to talk about things and ways to talk about things. And so we try to train in a way or impart an approach of our steering committee members, our commissioners, even our legislators who are behind it and champions to try to get people on message. So when a reporter calls them out of the blue, we're all kind of sharing the same information and the same data. That's a challenge and it takes a lot of work. But it really is critical to the advancement of this kind of dialogue with the public because it is complicated. And the challenge is to keep it simple and factual, but consistent, so we don't create confusion. It's a challenge just to keep the media on point, trying to report it in a consistent manner, and that's not going to happen probably. But at least if we keep trying to present and circulate consistent messages, I can't underscore how important that is as you move forward. So lastly, so we're kind of in phase 2 right now. Phase 3 will be if we do a demonstration, and that's where we really shift into the active focus groups, active surveying, very conscious engagement with the media, and gathering a lot of data throughout the process. So in Washington State, we are definitely learning by planning right now, and doing is coming later, but it's near now. We're ready to start doing something. What we've learned from our approach is that by following this sequential deliberative process, we've been building a kind of a foundation of knowledge with our policymakers, our decision makers, and thought leaders across the state, as well as industry leaders. Determining what we want before we test or transition has allowed us to set the policy parameters and set the policy discussion forward. And by working out reasonable functional solutions, it will make it much easier to discuss those specifics with the public. Everybody wants to immediately jump to what is it? What are you going to do? How will it work? And up to this point, we really haven't been able to say. We've zeroed in now on 4 approaches, but prior to that, it's really hard to have a very generalized conversation with people about what it may be, what it might be, it could be, and then you end up with stories kind of showing up that kind of run with they've made a decision when you really don't know yet. So this has kind of allowed us to kind of build those blocks and zero in on what we want to do and then talk about it. And assessing the risk, costs, and net revenues as we have continually refined what the system will be allows for informed decision making along the way. One of the concerns our decision makers, our legislators has had is we're going to jump into this and then we're going to regret it. We're going to find out after we jump that it was a mistake. And so what we've been able to do is have a process that allows for them to chime in at any point, adjust course if they want, focus our work as they want, and it always gives them, I guess, a convenient out if they so choose. It just isn't the right time. Luckily, they have kept going on it, but it's never been a locked-in decision yet for them to make. So they've always had the options available. So our evaluation to date, we have this overarching goal of identifying a sustainable long-term source for our transportation system that transitions away from the current motor fuel tax. Achieving the goal, we have some guiding principles that have to be refined, and our priority policy topics are listed in those boxes, and I'm sure you guys are probably well aware of all of those. Things like enforcement, data security, being simple, making it simple for the public to use and understand is really, really important, and then the phasing and having user options. Other important factors that we found we need to address is the need to distinguish between travel on public roads and other roads like out-of-state or private. And there are a lot of people that travel on dirt roads in rural counties or have very long driveways. Those are the kinds of things we realize we need to find a way to deal with, as well as out-of-state travel. Right now, one of the criticisms was, well, if you do this, how are you going to get people going through the state, whether it's trucks or visitors? And so the gas tax basically is something that they see as something that will stay in place as a basically parallel front system with a road usage charge, but taxpayers will only pay one or the other, but it's there to ensure that we capture through state travel. So that's another issue. The operational concepts that are moved forward through our process are four. The Commission and the Steering Committee felt it was really important to address privacy and data securities to have options that involve no technology. The problem is when you go to that, so these four kind of represent the range of possibilities on the spectrum. It doesn't mean this is necessarily where we will end up in the end when we actually maybe go launch something. But it gave the decision makers a sense of how it could work, trying again to address the myth that it's going to require technology, it's going to require a gizmo that's going to monitor you. And we wanted to say, no, you can do this in other ways. The problem is when you go away from technology, you lose that direct proxy between the tax or the dollars you're paying to the use of the system in a real, maybe pure sense. So the first one, the time permit, it's a flat fee. You could write a check once a year, prepay for your usage of the roads. That's going to be a premium. We're going to, we would presumably assume a pretty high total number of miles driven per year. Some people, they will find that attractive. They write a check and they're done. They've made their contribution to transportation and they move on. It has no correlation to your usage of the road, unfortunately, but it does provide a way to collect revenue and still have a way of thinking about that you're paying for using the roads, even though it isn't tied to the per mile. The odometer charge is the next approach. Gets you closer to connecting those two worlds. It would be basically an odometer read. It could be once a year when you do your vehicle registration. People would report their odometer year to year. It would be reconciled at that point if you underpaid or overpaid based on your actual total miles driven. So there is an overall connection now between your usage and what you're paying. But it doesn't allow for the distinction between when you're in the state, and out of state, or on a private road. So there are trade-offs with each one of these. The automated distance charge is where we move into the technology world. It would utilize some kind of in-vehicle technology that could distinguish between in-state and out-of-state travel and private and public road travel. We want to stress, and we have been stressing in our state, that this doesn't translate to the state tracking where you are. The data that would be collected would simply be your total miles and your overall location of in-state or out-of-state or public road versus private road. It is not down to detailed collection of day-to-day location and driving behaviors or travel patterns. The last one is a smartphone application. It would work similar to the automated distance charge, but it would use the smartphone as the proxy to collecting that mileage information is another option for people to report that. Those second two options give people that for those that really only want to pay for what they use, that's what you would need to do. It would make sure you only paid for the miles you used and precisely only on public roads in the state.
I had a quick question, and this is something that this committee will be working on over time, so not to get too far into the weeds, and maybe you don't have an answer to this yet, but I know a lot of people talk about the smartphones. We carry these things around all the time, but how does a smartphone know when you're driving versus a passenger in a car versus on a bus or whatever?
Correct.
I'm just curious if that came up.
It has, and I wish I was more of a technology guru. I know there are ways, like, for example, Bluetooth tagging, and I'm sorry for the guys, they probably could explain this better than I could, but there's ways by Bluetooth technology to know, number one, it's you, and then there has been discussions around one possible approach is taking a picture of your odometer that then tags to your Bluetooth ID number, and so when that's, I guess, turned in or texted, it then the system knows that that's you and your car. These are solvable issues that we are working through, and the technology, I guess, is advanced enough that we could distinguish. It would just take perhaps a step that the driver would have to take, if you will, to make sure it was them and not them in someone else's car that they end up paying for. So there, between the car's technology and your phone's technology, there is a way to identify accurately where you're at and that you are indeed driving your vehicle.
I have a question. It's more along the lines of administrative issues. The State Department of Motor Vehicles obviously is probably administering the program, right?
They'd be a big player in it, yes.
Now,
yes.
as far as registration, at the time of registration with your car, has that been sort of an issue with through the pilot because of possible antiquated systems? Because it's no secret that our state Department of Motor Vehicles, and this isn't a knock on them, their issues are kind of a little bit behind the times, and so I'm just trying to figure out if that would be a problem in California and what type of upgrade that would need to happen with them.
It definitely is an issue for us. Our vehicle and driver system is on a COBOL program. We can't find programmers hardly anymore to come and do fixes, so it's beyond antiquated. So it is a challenge and it's a problem. That's why we have the Department of Licensing on our steering committee, and this last year they have been heavily involved in these discussions as we move forward on this conversation of do we do a demonstration. The demonstration would probably utilize private sector in terms of the testing mode, so they wouldn't have to be geared up to do this in-house. They certainly are kind of parallel assessing what it would take to support something like this, and it just so happens in our state, our Department of Licensing for several years has been trying to get the funding necessary to do a IT migration to modernize their system. We're talking around a $40 to $50 million investment, and so the legislature has been very piecemeal on those investments. This certainly is pushing that envelope, and so I think from the legislative perspective, they're thinking about that as they think about this, because they will need to modernize ultimately to do something like that. So we have been coordinating with them on their timing of their modernization project. So if this does keep moving forward, that we're pacing with them so that we don't get ahead of the ball. But certainly for a demonstration, we could get by with doing it without having them go through that first. Okay?
Mr. Chair?
Okay. Just anybody speak up.
I carry two of these so-called very smartphones, and Christmas time, looking at a present for my son, and all of a sudden on my Facebook was an ad for what I was looking for on a website somewhere. I found it a bit odd. So I guess my question would be, how do you ensure privacy on this? I mean, if you start using smartphones, I mean, look, I'm ready to go back to the lowest tech phone I can get, the flip phone that does absolutely nothing but make a phone call. And I'm sure they can track everything that way too. So I guess I'm being a bit paranoid. I should start looking around me real quick. But my point is, how are you ensuring the public that the minute their phone is out there with you, that people aren't going to be hitting and saying, hey, you just drove by the Mickey D's, pull in and get a soda for 50 cents.
Right. I mean, I think this is an ongoing challenge government faces in general with the merging of technology and how we think about utilizing all our systems, whether it's transit or roadways or utilities. There's a lot of integration and overlap now between the world of technology and how we think about making things easy for people and effortless, but yet there's always that put and take. I think, we struggled with this with tolling in our state when we went to all electronic tolling. And not to bring up that topic because I try to keep them separate, but there is some analogies and some lessons to be learned. And what we learned through that experience, because there was, was that there was a lot of data transmission security issues with that. You have the sticker in your car and it's going to be read by these gantries, and that could be grabbed by anybody, and there was a lot of issues with that we had to work through. What we learned from that, generally speaking, was that the laws had to be very strong, clear laws had to be set forth on expectations and rules of protocol, if you will, around the usage and collection of data and how it's disposed of, and with very hefty fines around that. And then with that kind of is our backdrop, giving us the power to do so, when we entered into contracts with private vendors to actually collect the toll revenue for us using these little tags, we're able to use that as our protection, and it ensured then that the contracts could be written in ways and programming and technology could be developed that gave us those protections in a very demonstrated and proven way. So it's a very cautious movement forward, but you start with having very strong laws around the expectation of what is legal and what isn't, and what the consequences are if they're violated. And most of these big companies you're dealing with do not want to violate your state laws. So they have their own interests at heart part too. So there's kind of we have our own self-interest in mind. Protection of public data is critical, and I think it's a challenge we face at our DMVs and in tolling worlds that is an ongoing challenge that we have to stay vigilant about and always make sure we have the top security, the latest security measures in place. It requires an ongoing investment by the state. You know, we have to keep upgrading our systems. We have to keep always having the best security put in place, and we always want to make sure we have the best private sector providers supporting us. So it's an act of vigilance on top of that will get us to a level of protection. So far, we've had no issues. I don't believe there's any been issues across the nation when it comes to electronic tolling, and so we feel confident that the industry, the technology, and with strong laws will be there to help us move into something like this in a way that can protect the public.
I had a related question about the smartphone issue, which is that not everyone can afford one or chooses not to use them, and with the other three concepts that you've presented, that doesn't require you to purchase something in addition to the car, or have some technology in addition to the car. So I'm sort of wondering how you have thought about addressing that issue.
Well, we think by offering options, we are addressing that. If we went with one of these options or two that all had some kind of high-tech in nature deal, we would be consciously forcing people to go into a box they may not want to go into. And that's why we felt it was so important to think about the most simple way, like a time permit or an odometer read that doesn't matter what your income is or what you're geared with or what you drive. It's just about paying your fair share of using the roads. And so we have to make it easy for people to do and that they have options to do it. So we feel we are addressing that through that process. Okay? So some key decisions.
Wait, we have one more question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Question.
Yeah.
This is a non-technology.
Other button. Try the one to your left. There you
There
go.
you go.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your experience. And this is a non-technology question. So I was listening to your communications approach. So my question is, when do you plan to communicate with the citizens about this program? Is there a specific thing that you are waiting to happen before you start publicly engaging with the citizens?
So as I mentioned, we've had limited engagement. We certainly haven't been hiding from it, but so we've had conversations about the general problem, like why are we doing this, to try to just start embedding that understanding that we have a problem of sustainability over time. What we're waiting for is to kind of go out with this full-blown kind of approach is really to have something to talk about. What is it? We've been in kind of an academic study mode where we've, talked about the what ifs. You could do this, you could do that. Here's the pros, here's the cons. It's been, kind of a menu approach of things and continued discussions with policymakers. But once they kind of give us the green light and say, go do a demonstration of these things, maybe we hope it's the 4 options we've selected, then we have something to talk about that's tangible and specific, and then we can answer specific questions. We didn't want to speculate. We haven't wanted to speculate what it could be because we just don't know what direction we ultimately may go in. So we've been very careful to be tentative, to say we're looking at it, we're trying to assess. We've titled it an assessment, so that people understand we're trying to determine and feel our way through this to make sure it's the right thing. But when we have a demonstration and we have the it part of that question, then we can talk about the details of what is it, how will it work, how will the demonstration work, what could it cost you. We get into the tangibles of it. But till now we've been kind of flying at that 20,000 foot level, and now we're getting down into the 10 and 5,000 foot level, and we can start talking with specifics.
And keep in mind, some of these same questions, Jim Whitty, I hope you're taking some notes, because
Jim will even have better answers.
Yeah, he'll even have some answers as well. So, and that's the beauty of having both these folks here.
So some of the decisions and finding to date, based on our business case analysis and further financial analysis, we've determined that a road usage charge system makes sense for Washington. It ensures everyone pays their fair share, and we don't say that to pit any driver of one type of car versus another, but it is really a fact that right now we have inequities in how we pay for our highways. Everybody is using those roads, and yet depending on what you can afford to drive and what you have to drive will determine how much you pay, because we're on a consumption-based per gallon tax system. So, you know, we're right now in Washington State. A couple years ago, our legislature passed the electric vehicle fee as an attempt to start to bring some equity, if you will, in terms of usage of roads and paying for that. They imposed a $100 flat fee on electric vehicle owners. Went through first try, and in fact, the electric vehicle industry or users of those cars stepped forward and said, yeah, we want to pay. We aren't trying about, you know, we're not about trying to take advantage. And so it was a very positive thing. The interesting thing, though, is that the average car driver is paying around $250 to $300 a year in gas taxes in our state right now. So there's still a real inequity in terms of truly what you're paying for using the roads. There's an imbalance there that is present. And so moving to a per mile charge gets us away from that debate of who's really paying and who isn't. This really is, interestingly, some of our commissioners have raised and pointed out that they still don't like that it doesn't weave in weight considerations. That may happen at some point as we move down the road on this and we get smarter and a little more advanced in our thinking. But weight certainly correlates to the impact to the infrastructure. And so that probably, it's a consideration. We haven't dismissed it. We're just not sure how to weave it in right now. We're trying to keep it simple and have, the idea is that there'll be one rate for everybody, and we don't distinguish by type of engine or weight of your vehicle, for example. But that is something we probably will want to address at some point. The drivers must have a choice for how they pay. We feel like those payment options have got to be present. We can't do one or two is our view. Charges will be more costly to collect than the fuel tax. There's no question about it. We live in a really fortunate situation that we can collect the gas tax for 0.5 to 0.6% over 25 years versus a road usage charge. We're estimating it to be somewhere between 3.2 to 9.7% overhead. And that is a big range, really, but it's because it really depends on how you operate it. In our work so far, we've assumed what we'll call, for lack of a better word, the worst case scenario, which is government would run the whole thing. And I call that the worst case scenario because it tends to be the most expensive way to do things in terms of the costs of staffing and processes that the taxpayers would have to pay on top of participating in the program. So when you think about bringing in the private sector, which you'll hear more from Mr. Whitty on how they can be a partner, we anticipate that would lower our total cost depending on the role they would play. But we haven't gotten into that level of detail, so we've kind of come up with this range from about 3% to 9%. So, you know, the other thing that's come up is, why don't we just raise the gas tax? Why are we going through the mechanics of this? And why would we ever jump to a system that is this complicated? And why? You know, what's wrong? What's broken here? The challenge is, and the other dilemma is that we have a legislature who's thinking of raising the gas tax. They've been trying for 2 years, and they're trying again this year. And so that conversation with the public around, you're telling me it's not sustainable, but they want to raise our taxes again. So what we've been trying to be clear in our messaging, and we keep pounding, is road usage charging is long-term. We're talking 10 years plus out. Okay, we don't look at it as something that's happening tomorrow for us. So the gas tax is very viable. I mean, today we are collecting. We're not falling off the charts by any means. Gas prices have, helped consumption go up. With a flat rate tax, that's good for us. But the issue is when you go long term and look out 25 or 30 years and you factor in the anticipated change in the fleet and the higher and higher miles per gallon and electric vehicles, you just can see you're not going to sustain over time. So we were asked to do an exercise of calculation around, well, what if we just kept raising it? What if we just kind of kept up with that? So it drops, we raise it. There's always a tipping point on elasticity of how high you can really go before you start pushing consumption down artificially because you've set the price at a point that people just aren't going to pay it, or they reduce their driving habits and consumption. That works to a point, and it would require frequent gas tax hikes by the legislature to do that. We know that's a politically daunting and almost impossible task. Just to get, an increase in place takes it's a very heavy lift, and then it's usually subject to a public vote. So it's something that just can happen. We came out on our conclusions it would take at least a penny a year to keep us at maybe the level we're at over the next 20 years. And so when I say the level we're at, that means there's no extra money for new projects. There's no extra money generated for growing maintenance and preservation needs. It just keeps us at today's levels, which already are insufficient for meeting our needs. So, that kind of gives you a sense of the test of what it would take over time if you understand the forecasting that goes around the consumption and the miles per gallon transitions we're seeing. The other thing we learned is that we have to develop a concept of operations, and that's where we landed on this third year, is putting together this. It's like basically a blueprint for what a system could look like. It serves as the technical basis for our financial analysis. It's a starting point for designing the demonstration, and it provides an opportunity for stakeholders to understand how this will work and what will work at a high level. So it starts that conversation again around the specifics. So we have resulted this year in submitting a report to the legislature just this week that contains all the latest findings and recommendations of our work from this last year. And the commission decided to put forward a demonstration request. They kind of went with the bigger choice. There were options, and in tight times they kind of figured like, well, we're going to ask for what we think would be the best thing, knowing that we may not get that far. It takes a three-prong approach. With the demonstration project itself, a full-on public attitude assessment, the surveying, the focus groups, the research and analysis, and the outreach to the media, and then the communication engagement, which continues along that line. The public communication engagement is probably the most critical for us because we just haven't been doing that in a formal way. So we are moving definitely towards doing a lot more of that. The demonstration that's being proposed is 12-month in duration for the actual demonstration. It would involve up to 2,000 residents in our state from 5 regions. We would be careful to pick localities that are urban, rural, on borders, so that we can get all those dynamics tested. We would test all 4 of our options that I mentioned. And in totality, it would probably take about 41, somewhere between 30 to 41 months from start to finish in terms of getting results. And we're always looking for opportunities to collaborate, which is why we've been working so closely with Oregon and now California. And so we do see opportunities as we all collectively think about moving forward that might reach economies of scale for all of us. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Whew, wow, that's a lot you've been doing, and certainly something we can learn from. Do we have some questions for Rima right now, Eric?
Yeah, I have another question. Enforcement. What type of enforcement mechanisms are in place to prevent evasion? Possible evasion issues?
Well, there's always the traditional auditing and those kinds of spot checks, for the odometer reads. We're looking at a variety of, literally using law enforcement versus the Department of Licensing would be able to do definitely some analysis. It would be a little more long-term, slow reacting, but you could identify trends. You can estimate what people's mileage can be based on year to year, and if someone goes from traveling 15,000 a year to reporting 5, probably it's a flag to go look into it. There would have to be authorities to do that, and that's another political debate right there. And then, really, though, what we kind of found, and it was kind of an elegant solution to a lot of that concern around evasion that kind of dawned on us really this last year, which is, the first 2 years we were going into this saying, this is going to replace the gas tax. It's going to go away, and we're going to do this. And this last year, it dawned on us that, wait a minute, why would we get rid of the gas tax? That's at the pump. It's happening. We collect our revenue up front, just like we do now. Nothing changes. We get our through-state travelers. But then, those that are on the road usage charge program aren't going to pay both. So if I'm on the road usage charge program, I turn around and I get reconciled, let's say, month to month. So if I've paid $60 in gas tax in a given month, and my mileage reported shows that I should have only paid $54, I get a credit of $6 for the next month. If I ended up traveling more than what I paid in gas taxes, I might owe the state $5 or $10. We participated in Oregon's pilot, the last one, and I'm sure Jim will fill you in on this. Some of us in Washington got to participate as well. And we get these bills in the mail, and I kept getting credits every month. And some of our commissioners said, well, wait a minute, this isn't right. We keep paying people back. But it's all about the rate. But it was really interesting to see that mechanism. So the gas tax, keeping that in place is a way to really minimize the evasion threats that you could have if you went to a full-on road usage charge system.
I have another question. What type of input has the trucking industry provided to you up in Washington?
They're on the steering committee.
Is it the Washington Trucking Association? Okay.
And so far, they've been really positive because we've decided that we're only looking at cars under 10,000 pounds. So
That's all Eric needed to hear. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you come to Washington, you're good. But I will say that in Washington State, we have pretty hefty weight fees. And so the theory was, and diesel taxes. So, in theory, they're paying. And the thinking was every time there's been a gas tax increase, our legislature has raised the weight fees by the tune of 15%. And they pay diesel tax. So, again, people who are concerned about impact to the road infrastructure by weight, that continues to be kind of a nagging thing that we feel that weight fee they're paying is a fair proxy for now to the usage and impact to the roads. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay. One more question?
Yeah.
Sorry to hog the microphone.
That's what this is all about.
You had mentioned that you had a 100-person panel that participated in the survey, the tedious survey, the 2-hour or 30-minute survey. Is that something that was implemented through this process, or is it something existing?
It's a standalone program that we do.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a survey panel of Washington State residents. We also have a survey panel of 25,000 ferry riders. It's all online, and we've started doing this several years ago just to get statistically valid data to decision makers on user preference, priority, and for the ferry system it was also about customer satisfaction and usage. And so it's evolved into this, and so we're generating a ton of data for decision makers and for the agencies as well to use. But it's been now a tool we're utilizing for this as well.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, Rima is not going anywhere. We're going to keep her right here, and we're now going to move over to Jim Whitty, or as we should call him, James Whitty.
Oh, you want I'll just stay here.
When you talk about some of the things that have gone on in Washington State, now we'll look at Jim Whitty, who's the program manager with the Office of Innovative Partnerships and Alternative Funding. Is that correct? At the Oregon Department of Transportation. And he's going to give us an overview of what Oregon's efforts have been to implement its fully operational per mile usage charge, which starts, I believe, July 1st of this year, right? Wow. So he joined the Oregon Department of Transportation in 2001, and since then has led all aspects of the development and implementation of Oregon's road charge program. So welcome, Jim Whitty. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, we got to make sure that microphone is up and running. I don't think it is. It is? Okay.
I'm very pleased to be here.
We're going to make sure that mic is on. At least I can't hear you over the speaker. Give us a test, Jim. Can you do it sitting down? All right.
You could sit over and listen.
On.
Okay.
Very good.
There we go.
Okay. I'm very happy to be addressing the Road Usage Charge Technical Advisory Committee for California. For many years, we worked alone with all the criticism heaped on us and all of the accusations heaped on us, and always wanted to have allies. So when Washington went forward in 2012, that was a delight, and now California's coming in to do their analysis, and I'm very, very appreciative. We are at your service. The state of Oregon is at your service. I make that commitment for the state at the direction of our director of Department of Transportation, and I make that commitment myself personally. I am at your service. So we're in our 14th year of working on this. I was hired specifically to work on this issue back in 2001. I can't give you the entire story. It's not going to happen. It would be a life story. Who wants to hear that? But I will go and tell you some brief history before I go into where we are today. And probably hit some issues I think are important to you. And if I miss some of your questions again, you have some good questions, bring them up again. I want to address them. Okay, so after 94 years, Oregon being the first state in the union to pass the gas tax, they passed Senate Bill 810, which directs implementation of a fully operational road usage charge program for light vehicles on July 1, 2015. Now, we did not the state or legislature or ODOT has not addressed the use of heavy vehicles at all, because we already have a heavy vehicle tax that's based on distance. It's called the weight mile tax. It's based on not only distance, but distributed axle weight. And there's many tables and everything. We've had it for 70-some years. It has not been electronic up until recently, when we've had an electronic option for payment. But that's a whole different story. That's not what I'm talking about here today. And indeed, our efforts have not addressed this. Okay, the first application of this law will be with 5,000 volunteers, which ought to be of interest to you. So let's go into the history first. We started like you did, like you were starting now, with a task force, or in your case, an advisory committee. And it was at the request of the legislature, who adopted House Bill 3456 in 2001. And they were not addressing a situation at the time that is before you now, the rise of the fuel-efficient vehicle, a highly fuel-efficient vehicle. They were addressing what they thought might happen. They had, back then, the committee was looking at concept cars, and the hybrid was first out. It was just like the second year out. And other cars they had natural gas car and other such cars, and they said, what happens if these take hold in the marketplace? And so they said, we need to figure out what happens now before that happens. So they created the Road User Fee Task Force. It had 4 state legislators out of the 12, one from each caucus. And so two House members from the Republicans and Democrats, and same on the Senate side, two transportation commissioners, a mayor and a county commissioner, and then 4 at large. The DOT was required to administer the task force. I was hired to do that. And the DOT was also required to develop and implement pilot programs based on the recommendations of the task force. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It also allowed for a fuel tax refund for those paying the mileage fee during a pilot program. The statutory directives given to the task force were very few, but they were important. Reliability, ease of motorist use. That's been one tenet that's been flowing all the way through for these whole 13-plus years. Enforceability, low capital costs, and operating costs. And then the task force themselves came up with additional directives. Do not charge for out-of-state travel. Protect motorist privacy. Provide a gas tax credit. Have a seamless transition. They don't have a drop-off in revenues going from one system to another. Have a minimal burden on the private sector. Allow congestion pricing and local option. As they worked, though, they came up with other policy issues that were important. And these are the kinds of things that you will discuss on your advisory committee. Are you going to augment or replace the gas tax? This is the same discussion that it all begins with in every other state. The first pilot was designed with these things in mind. First of all, replace the fuel tax. That was the first directive. And then you're going to have manual data collection or electronic data collection. Now, back in the day, they were concerned about manual data collection being very expensive, so they opted for electronic data collection for the first pilot. And then you're going to have one method of reporting or multiple choices. They didn't actually even think about multiple choices. They went right with one method in this first pilot.
And Jim, if I could just pop you for a second. Your wish has been granted. You can now stand back up at that podium. Thank you very much to the staff for fixing that. Very much appreciated.
Yeah. I'm a bit more comfortable up here. I don't know why, but I am. Okay. So then, are you going to have basic mileage reporting, which is essentially from the odometer system, or you're going to have location-based, which would be GPS. Now, this group innocently chose location-based. Okay, this is before any excitement had started. Okay, maybe this started the excitement. Yes, it probably did, but innocently did so. And then you're going to have a government-selected technology or a market-based technology system, and they chose government technology-run system. And then for operations would be government operations or private sector operations. They chose government operations. And then one method for billing or multiple, and they chose one method. There are many missteps in the choices made for the first pilot. Okay, many missteps, as we'll see. Okay, so the first pilot started in 2006 and ran for 10 months. It was basically a pay-at-the-pump model. Mileage reporting occurred the data flowed at the fuel pump. It was a wireless reporting method. There was a GPS mileage reporting device selected by ODOT, actually. We had somebody manufacture it for this purpose. And the payment was at the fuel pump along with the fuel purchase, and there was an automatic fuel tax credit because it could all happen there at the fuel pump. It was heavily capital intensive, and we ran into a whole host of issues. These are the major ones we ran into. First one, of course, was privacy. Now, the device we used could not track, okay, because it was destroyed after the tally. All of the coordinates were destroyed after the tally. But it didn't matter. It was a GPS chip in the device. That's all that mattered. Everybody saw tracking. They saw they're going to follow me. They want to know where I'm going. So that, we could not, I spent about probably 7 years defending that across the country, actually, saying why it wasn't invasion of privacy, okay? But that was a mistake, because it doesn't matter what it really does. It matters what the public thinks it does when you're dealing with this issue. So then, governmental bureaucracy. We're going to have a huge governmental bureaucracy. It's massive. It'll be very expensive. That was a big worry. There'll be complexity. The people dealing with it, they have to pay the mileage charge. They have to have a very complex thing like the income tax to deal with it. Really complex. The cost was going to be exorbitant, and it would be fairness in so many different ways it would amaze you. Everybody who looked at it saw fairness from a different angle. Rural drivers have to drive a lot. It's unfair to them. People that drive fuel-efficient vehicles have to, well, use the roads, but they are doing this for a good moral purpose. It's unfair to them. The poor people have to drive, and they shouldn't have to pay. It goes on and on and on. Fairness is a very difficult issue here. So, we had some reflecting. It took a couple of years after the first pilot to reflect and come up with a new alternative that would solve these issues. So we had a new strategic objective: create a sustainable road usage charge market that encourages evolution of mileage reporting technologies and business systems into effective, affordable, convenient, and attractive options for the motoring public. This is a whole different look. This is starting to look like the cell phone market. That's exactly what we were looking at as we move forward. Okay, so the redesign had these basic tenets. Design the program with an open architecture. Okay, now this, I'm getting a little bit tech here. But what that means is we're not stuck with one type of technology or one type of vendor, okay, which is what happens in toll systems. It's going to be open, allowing for many, many different possibilities to come into the system. Let's just flip forward. Sorry about that. Where am I? Sorry, this just jumped forward. Okay. Second one, the government should not select the mileage reporting technology. When the government selects it, it doesn't matter if it's correct or incorrect, it is wrong. People come and pick it apart no matter what. So we cannot have the government selecting the mileage reporting technology if you want acceptance of the system. Instead, motorists should have choices from the marketplace. Okay, there's many, many ways out there for mileage reporting to occur. We see these with pay-as-you-drive insurance right now. We know that things like OnStar and Ford Sync and all the automaker telematics have possibilities for this. There's a lot of ways to report mileage. And so the choices should come from the marketplace at the choice of the motorist, not the government. The private sector should be heavily involved with transaction processing and account management. It shouldn't just be the government. And then we wanted to build a system to be flexible So it could have many different policy applications, many different rate structures, so it could withstand changes over time without having to redo the system. It could be scalable. It could be for a community, or it could be for a state, or multiple states, or even the nation. And be geographically limited. It could be used outside the state of Oregon. These were our objectives after a reflection of a couple of years. This led to the second pilot program, which was much different than the first. It did not involve the fuel pump at all. It this is just going forward on its own. I'm sorry about that. It had mileage reporting wirelessly from machine to machine. And a commercial market offered 3 choices for mileage reporting, which I'll go into in a minute because I'll be talking about the effort currently underway. It also had what was called a flat fee, which was essentially the ability for a motorist to assume a maximum miles driven. Okay, let's say they drive a lot. Let's say they drive 35,000 miles. We set that number as the maximum, and the motorist was able to choose 35,000 times the rate and pay that without any reporting whatsoever. It's expensive. I predicted nobody in the pilot would choose that method, but somebody did. That goes to show you. You can't predict these things. People do what they do. There was payment of periodic billing by check or credit card, and it was simple and easy, very easy for the motorist. If you look at the government side or the system side, it looks complicated and difficult. The reason it is on the government side complicated and difficult is because on the user side, on the motorist side, it's so easy that they don't see any of the difficulties, the complexities. They don't see them at all. And we had 8 state legislators in our second pilot. I actually recruited them into the pilot because we wanted to make a move on legislation. And I had to have people in the back rooms of the legislature, rooms I can't get into, explain to other legislators why this is not a problem, why this was an easy choice. And it worked. The system was simple and easy. Okay. It led to passage of the first per-mile road usage charge law in the nation. And I want to tell you that this was not the preferred bill. We actually had a mandate bill that would have been applied to vehicles 55 miles per gallon and above as the first application. And the House members were identified to vote for a supermajority requirement bill, and they were identified by name. We couldn't quite get to a supermajority requirement in the Senate, however. We were short a vote. And so that bill did not become law, and we opted for the next best thing, which is the volunteer program of a fully operational system. So it has some of the elements I mentioned earlier. It has an open system in it. It has choice in it. The rate is 1.5 cents per mile. That's based on our 30-cent gas tax divided by the average fuel efficiency of a motor vehicle of 20 miles per gallon. You get the 1.5 cents. There's a fuel tax credit required, and it protects personally identifiable information. There's a particular section on that. It also requires public-private partnerships. The private sector will have an important role in collecting of the road usage charge in this pilot program. Okay, let's talk about how the bill calms public concerns. Okay, you never get rid of them. They never go away. It's the public after all. And but you can calm them down if you make right choices. So the solutions for privacy, I'll go into these a little bit more deeply in a minute. But the solutions generally were have no requirement for GPS device. It's simply not mandated. Might be available, but not mandated. Have no government selected reporting device. Required choices and protection of personally identifiable information. For government bureaucracy, creating a market with private sector firms available to do the collecting kind of reduces the cost on government, reduces the cost on the system. Complexity, the solution is to let the driver choose their own simplicity. If you give them choices, they'll choose the one that suits their lifestyle needs. If you impose a requirement on them, well, it's going to be complex for some of them, let's face it. But we can't do that. Let the people do it themselves. Cost, I'll tell you that a bigger system is better than a smaller one. It's easier to spread the costs. I'll go into that a little bit more. And then fairness, really that question is in the hands of the state legislature. It's about the rate structure. And they will decide what the rate structure is. You can talk about it here, but really that's a later discussion. It really isn't a now discussion, because that can be cut many, many different ways. Okay, let's talk about protection of personally identifiable information. Now, the statute in the state of Oregon that passed with Senate Bill 810 has protections on use. Okay, so we have a chain of custody of the information, and people that are in that chain, and that's identified in the bill, who they are. It limits access. They cannot use that information outside of that chain. The law imposes upon them an obligation to protect that information. Now, there is an exception for express approval that the motorist may give. But that express approval, as we're defining in rule, says that they must know exactly who they're giving express approval for. So the data may go to another place, but the motorist says, yes, I want that data to go there. All right? If that doesn't happen, the data won't go there, or it will be a violation of the law. We actually had these provisions in the bill before the legislature started, but the American Civil Liberties Union said they're not good enough. We want a data destruction requirement. So we sat down with them. It was actually a very, very easy negotiation. It was easy because the DOT said, why shouldn't we support privacy? We should. All we were concerned about is making sure that we could operate the system. The ACLU said, we understand that. We only had 4 meetings, traded some language, and it worked. So we have a data destruction requirement excuse me, that says the data must be destroyed within 30 days after the later of payment processing, dispute resolution, or noncompliance investigation. And these issues are defined a little bit more in the rulemaking. There's also an exception for consent by the motorist, if they want to give it. There's a lot more about this in detail, but I'll give you the outlines today. Then, after the law passed, we recognized at the DOT, as we were doing rulemaking, that there were some parts of privacy protection that should be in the bill that never made it in. And we said, let's add them to legal requirements and make them protections by administrative rule. So we have built into our administrative rules that are going through the process right now the right of motorists to inquire, the right to investigate, and the right to correct. And so while those could be a part of statute, and they could be for, say, another state, perhaps California or Washington, to add those elements as requirements of statute, there's simply administrative rule in Oregon until perhaps later when we can add them in.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
Actually, 2. One, for the exceptions, how is there a mandate for how they can be communicated or to the consumer? By which I mean, you could sort of envision consent provision being buried in terms of service or in a way that's not very accessible for the consumer, and then the consumer signs it over and doesn't realize it. So is there any sort of mandate for that? And the second is enforcement provisions for violations of any of these as well. Like what are those, and what's the oversight for it?
I should have gone into this. With consent, the requirements the consent has to be separate from your general long list of pages and pages that nobody reads requirement. It has to be separate and apart and clear. So ODOT will actually be enforcing that. What we placed in our contractual agreements with the private sector account managers, and they'll be the ones managing all of this, that we have a right to penalize them for violations. So that's our enforcement mechanism. ODOT itself does not have enforcement on itself, but everyone that's actually doing the collecting and account management and processing do have those requirements, and we will enforce those requirements if they're violated.
But that's a really good issue to raise, and as we get into more of the nuances of these after today's overview, but that's a perfect issue we should drill down into a little bit more. And I know, as Jim said, he's available. We'll fly him down from Oregon every meeting if we need to. Thank you.
Okay, so let's, there's many more things to talk about here, but I'm giving a 101 overview to all of you. Okay, now the costs.
Was there another question that you had? Or is that it? Okay, no. Good.
Okay, the costs are important. And I wanted to prepare answers for this prior to the legislative session, so we developed a financial and economic cost model to predict system cost under various scenarios. And so you just change some elements of the program and the cost will change, because we didn't know what the legislature was going to do. So what it ended up predicting was with a private sector account management system that with 10,000 road usage charge payers, we would be at 50% of revenues, which of course is unacceptable. It's too high. But if you get to 100,000, you can get around 10% of revenues. And if you get to 1 million, you're below 5% of revenues. Now, this starts to maybe inform you as to why we're interested in the state of California proceeding forward on this topic. Yes, you have a lot of people down here. If we all join together and work on a system that could be used across borders, we could reduce costs to a very low amount. Below 5% of revenues is a sweet spot. I spoke with the U.S. DOT about this model. They heard about it, and they wanted it. We couldn't reach agreement on the fact that they might improve the model, and Oregon might not get the improvement. So it was a one-way street with them, so we declined. That will not be the case with the state of California. We are both members of the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium, and we're happy to work there on our financial and economic model to share it with the state of California and the other members of the consortium.
I had a quick question. I think cost is going to be one of the significant issues for this, and your numbers here of getting down to 5%. That sounds a heck of a lot better than 50%, but 5% is a lot better than the maybe 1% or whatever it is for the gas tax. And so I think that as we deliberate on these issues, I think that's going to be a significant issue. And I know over time, with the degradation perhaps of the value of the gas tax, depending upon fuel efficiency, that equation may make more sense for a total revenue perspective. But I think the cost issues are something we need to delve into quite a bit. So appreciate that.
And Jim, could you give everybody just a brief primer on the consortium and who that all includes? What is it's like 12 states or?
Yes, in August of 2013, the state of Washington and the state of Oregon met with other states from the WASHTO organization and pitched the idea of a consortium. And then over the course of the next, say, 7 months, 9 other states joined for a total of 11. California is one of them. It's most everybody in the West. And it's not an endorsement of road use charging at all. It's a joint research organization that can pool resources and then address issues together. And as was mentioned, we did the out-of-state driver issue. That's really a bugaboo in this thing. How do you deal with non-resident drivers? And the issue there isn't so much that a road usage charge system is complex. What's complex is transitioning from one system to another. When some states have done it and other states haven't, and there's no interstate compacts or anything like that yet. That's what makes it difficult. But suffice to say, those issues are already being addressed by the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium, which is, I think, going to be very valuable. And this is just one of many issues that the group will address. Okay, let's go to the fairness issue. Rima addressed some of these already, but I'll go into them too. It tends to be in 3 categories. Rural drivers complain a lot about a per mile charge. They regard it as unfair. I can tell you, I spoke around the state 10 times in all corners of Oregon before the 2013 session. I'm trying to get some understanding of what we were proposing out there. I gave the same talk about, 10 times. The responses were completely different every time I gave it. Some of them said, oh yes, this makes sense. I like the choice idea. They all like the choice idea. Some of them, I was looking for the nearest door or window because I might need to exit quickly. It was not a pleasant experience. Not so much of that, a little bit of that. But this issue is very confusing to people. They don't seem to understand that they already pay a road usage charge in the form of the gas tax. It's not fair, but they pay it. And if it's replaced, the real question is, what's the difference? And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. They might look at it as an add-on, or maybe they don't even know they pay a gas tax. I don't know. But it's a difficult issue, and it's more of a communications issue. The logic is not in the minds of the people just yet. One of the things that we learned, we did some work on rural driving against urban, compared to urban driving, and we did a step beyond what the state of Washington did. We learned what the difference was. It was not so much driving on public roads. The driving for rural and urban in Oregon is roughly the same for driving on public roads. I think the rural drivers about 7% more from our research, okay? But they do drive more. They do drive more off public roads. And that was enlightening to see that the big difference was something that wouldn't be charged in a road usage charge, or didn't have to be charged in a road usage charge. So that whole issue needs some management, and we haven't done a good job of it. California, now you're in it, you're going to have to jump in and help us, I guess. Fuel-efficient vehicles is interesting. No one disagrees they're currently not paying a fair share for road use. But I've heard it said, you're removing the incentive to drive a fuel-efficient vehicle. Well, I suppose, a few months ago, I could say that the cost of the gas tax in Oregon was maybe 10% of the cost of fuel, so that wouldn't be true. Maybe more like 5% now, but still, we're not removing the incentive to drive a fuel-efficient vehicle. There are many other incentives, and the avoiding of fuel cost is one of them. The road usage charge in Oregon will not be a large burden in any event. Average about 12,000 miles a year for most people that drive those vehicles. That's about $180 on a 1.5 cents. It's not a huge burden. So a lot of this is much ado about nothing. Now, I can tell you that the state legislators in the state of Oregon, there are only about 2 of them that I can recall that really had an issue with this. The rest of them, who might be supporters of, definitely supporters of the industry of fuel-efficient vehicles, said, are you kidding me? Everybody's got to pay something for the road system. They could see what was going to happen long term. They said, no, we need a new system. There wasn't a great amount of sensitivity to this argument at the Oregon legislature. Non-resident driving I already dealt with. I will say this, though. Until a regional system is developed, the non-resident drivers will still pay the fuel tax. So they may not pay it if they're electric. They won't pay it at all, but there's nothing lost is my point. If you have a gas tax system, they already pay that, and then they'll pay the gas tax under a per mile charge, and so nothing is really lost. You haven't necessarily gained anything yet, and we probably won't do so until we work together to solve the problem. But nothing is lost, and so it's not really an issue it isn't really big for us not to proceed on the issue. Okay, let's talk about Oregon's per mile charge system and what it is and what it isn't. It is a machine-to-machine communications. Okay, with something, communications is a standard mileage message. It's a description of it's a data format really of how many miles are driven. There's a fuel consumption also that's transmitted, so we can give a automatic fuel tax credit. There's the identification of the vehicle, an identification of the mileage reporting device, so they can be paired. So if one leaves the car, it can be identified as not part of this car. And it all goes easily, and there's no other reporting going on. DOT will certify private sector entities to collect the mileage data and process the charge and manage accounts. And they will go through an extensive certification process to make sure they do things according to requirements and standards. Okay, let's talk about the 2 types of account managers that are now under contract in the state of Oregon. On the left side, we have an ODOT account management. That is the government option. So people will be able to choose to use the government to do the mileage reporting and tax processing and account management. There's a big difference between the government side and the other side, which is the commercial side, where there'll be a lot of competition. On the ODOT side, they must accept any volunteer that comes in. They don't have a choice. Basic reporting, which is reporting all miles driven with no GPS function whatsoever, is the only thing that will be offered over there. There won't be any coordinates that the government can access. We designed this on purpose. We didn't want to have coordinates. We wanted to be able to say, we do not have coordinates on the government side. So therefore, we would never know location. No value-added services. So it'll only be a road usage charge. That's the only thing happening on the government side. The government cannot sell mileage data for any reason and cannot keep it. They must get rid of it within 30 days. So that's the ODOT account management side. And we have hired one firm to basically do the ODOT brand. It's called SANAF, an electronic tolling company out of Europe, to do that work. And they will act as ODOT. Now the commercials, it's very boring over there on the government side. On the commercial side, there's a lot more excitement. That's where we're hoping most of the activity will occur. They can recruit the individual firms, and there are 2 of them so far in our market. We expect to get a 3rd one before July 1, 2015. Those firms will be able to recruit and choose volunteers. It's a business opportunity for them. They can have any type of mileage reporting technology that meets ODOT standards and is certified. They can sell value-added services. They can take the road usage charge and put it in as part of their business mix with other services they're selling the public. They can sell mileage data with the express approval of the road usage charge payer. They can retain that data beyond 30 days with the consent, again, separate and apart from the general consent of the road usage charge payer. So that is where the excitement will happen. That's where things like bundled billings, reducing costs of the system by competition. The 2 firms
so
that
does
are
that, excuse me, does that mean that the commercial companies would be able to collect location with the consent of the customer?
Well, yes. Remember, we have choice here. So we have to have one device be non-GPS, and that will certainly be the ODOT account manager at minimum. The commercial account managers can also offer a non-GPS basic reporting device if they like. Okay? They can also offer a GPS device. So there will be choices.
So Jim, if you could explain on the commercial side, and I believe I heard this at a prior presentation you gave, which was fascinating. It gets to Supervisor Haggerty's question, to where this could become commercialized. So Starbucks all of a sudden buys your miles. If you go in and buy something at Starbucks, for example, they might give you 5 miles or something as a credit to come there. Can you kind of expound on that and how that ties in with the commercial?
The way I would see that kind of thing happening, and again, this is not something the government has an interest in, except for allowing those businesses to actually do business with other businesses. If Starbucks wanted to buy somebody's miles, they would have to have an agreement with one of the account managers, or however many they can find, and make that agreement as a separate business transaction between Starbucks and one of the account managers. That's not something we're particularly interested in. That can happen. That is a business arrangement.
Yeah, and then I had one other question, which is, do you have so one of the privacy threats that we're always concerned about is law enforcement access to the information. So now I realize that under the ODOT system on your basic site, you're not collecting the coordinates at all. So there would never be any location data even within the first 30 days. But that wouldn't necessarily be true for the commercial companies. And so is there anything in the law that governs law enforcement access to the data that's held by the commercial account managers?
Yes, that's going a little deeper, but yeah, they've got to have a warrant, and those warrant requirements are in the law.
I have a quick question before we move on. These bullets for the commercial account managers, were they viewed as being in place only for this 5,000 person implementation, or is it viewed as the model for future much wider spread use of this? And I'm particularly interested in the choose the volunteer kind of thing. Would the private sector be able to reject people, and on what basis would they do that? And also, some of the other aspects of this, may be of concern to some consumers, but if over time there's more innovation or more benefits to the commercial option perhaps than the state option, then people are going to be forced to get this, you're going to have to give up that. So I'm just curious about those things, and especially for the future of wider spread use.
In fact, this system is designed as the future system. Okay, what's going to be different is right now we have two firms on the commercial side. Azuga, which is a subsidiary of Danlaw, which is a California company that provides most of the pay-as-you-drive insurance and mileage reporting for pay-as-you-drive insurance. And the other one is Verizon, is on that side. If you only have, say, a handful of firms on the commercial side, what you're saying makes sense. People might feel like, to get that, I have to do this. We're hoping for a little more robust market down the road, especially when you have many states, especially the Pacific Rim states, that are interested in this. If we get a sizable number of mileage payers in the system, now the market grows. You've got a lot of competition there, and you're probably going to be able to find something that's reasonable on the commercial side. So we want to grow that market. That market is important. It's important because we need to drive down the system cost of collection. And we also need to ensure that that evolution of technologies occurs.
Did you ever explore on the commercial side of having a person's auto insurance carrier do the monitoring and the billing? And if so, what was the pitfalls?
Well, the pitfall was they had to propose to do it. Okay, we had an RFQ for this. Okay, and any firm meeting qualifications and would become certified could do it. So those firms that you mentioned could have proposed, but they just didn't. That was the only pitfall. Now, this is where we are today. We had a limited RFQ for this system for the July 1 launch. We had to know what we were dealing with. But later this year, ODOT intends to issue a permanent procurement, a permanent RFQ that will stay open so that firms can come in to that market over and over again as opportunities, say, happen in other states. We expect that those firms to come in. But initially, we only have 5,000. Tell you what, that's not much of a market. And so these firms are really looking at the first opportunity. These are the early opportunity type business arrangements. They see something, they want to get in and be the experts early on. Over time, I think the insurance firms could either align with in a business transaction arrangement or actually be an account manager.
I have a question for clarification. On the commercial market side, it says all mileage reporting technologies that meets standards. What standards are we referring to?
Yeah. These are standards adopted by the Oregon Department of Transportation for how the system would work. We have security requirements, we have privacy requirements, we have business requirements. We have developed three particular documents, a systems requirement specification, interface control document, and a business requirement document. There's 302 requirements in all of three of those. So they are published, they are available, and they form the basis of an open system. So now, the choices made by the Oregon Department of Transportation might be absolutely correct, or they might need to be adjusted. We're going to learn that as we go. And in fact, just this week, we had we offered to the 11 states of the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium the opportunity to review all of those requirements in our entire system. We called it the critical analysis of Oregon's system, and this was one of the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium projects. And so we're going to get comments back from those states. This is the beginning of perhaps adjusting it for regional needs. We are very willing to adjust it for regional needs based on the western states. The eastern states, by the way, have a whole different arrangement up there, very short borders and everything. I don't even want to think about that. But out here, we have big boxy states. We ought to be able to work together. Okay. Anything more there? This is an important question. Okay, we can go into this in more detail at any time. Okay. So let's go into how the volunteers will be come into the system. The first thing they'll see is marketing materials. We are going to market this program around the state. Then they'll enter a website explaining the system. That's one way to get in. They'll see a choose your plan matrix where they can choose what type of mileage charging plan they want to use. Then they will see mileage reporting device activation instructions. they will drive, and they'll see an invoice with payment. So how does this work? Okay. There's the matrix up on the left. This is the matrix we used in our second pilot. It was very simple. People could click and go deeper if they wanted more information. Most people just use the matrix. So they can select a provider via the ODOT website, or they can be recruited by a commercial account manager. Then they'll be selecting a mileage reporting method. It'll either be basic, which is all miles reported with no GPS, or advanced, which has vehicle location capability, or switchable, back and forth. There are people that want to do that. We will not have the flat fee method for our July 1, 2015 pilot, but I suspect that to return in kind of a mandate bill down the road. Again, those methods already, depending on how the fuel tax is used, automatically reports fuel usage as well for a fuel tax credit. Then they will activate their mileage reporting device.
Excuse me, can I ask about
Yes.
about the fuel tax? How is that reported?
The devices that we've used in our second pilot and the ones going forward have the ability to read fuel consumption of the vehicle. So, fuel by measuring the vacuum of the vehicle. So once you know the usage, you simply report that usage, multiply it times the fuel tax rate, and there's your credit. It shows up on the bill. We did this in our second pilot. It worked very, very well. I'm kind of nervous about it. Some state legislators were keeping track of it very, very closely to see if it was accurate. Turns out it was.
And can it be modified to take account for off-road and out-of-state use?
For advanced and switchable, yes. For basic, no, because they're reporting all miles driven. But I'm glad you raised that point. I always forget to raise this. I always forget to make this point. We recognized that there are people that drive off-road or out of state that want to use basic reporting. And they're going to say, you're pushing me to GPS. Okay? You're pushing me, and we want to avoid that. So we've built into our rules the opportunity to report manually for driving off public roads or out of state. And this will be similar to the existing requirement or existing opportunity to report for fuel tax usage off public roads. Okay? There's already a mechanism for that. They have to give some evidence that they've driven off public roads, but ODOT accepts that, and I think this happens in other states as well.
I should ask, does that exist in California law right now, where people can report off, like if they're on a farm but they're using gas they paid with gas tax? No? I'm seeing somebody else shaking their head. Well, that's a good question for us to follow up on.
You probably want to talk to your fuels tax people about that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to offer that opportunity for the basic reporting because we simply want to have the opportunity to say we're not pushing anybody's GPS. Okay, the activation is interesting. As I said, there are many types of mileage reporting, and a lot of vehicles are coming with something called telematics, which can do mileage reporting now. A lot of them are high-end. A lot of them are not high-end. A lot of them are electric vehicles. This looks to be something that the automakers are wanting to put in every vehicle they can. It attracts people to it. It's another place of competition in vehicle choice. It makes sense. They have the ability to report miles, as I described, because they're accessing the engine control unit in the car. It can happen. And the issue is, will the automakers cooperate? And so far, we have not seen that cooperation. I'm not saying it won't happen, but there's a little nervousness there on their part, okay, on this topic. So at this point, what will happen in Oregon is installation will be aftermarket device. And in Oregon, the first opportunities will be with the pay-as-you-drive insurance dongles, which plug into the diagnostic port. They're very simple to use and install. It took me 5 minutes to put mine in the second pilot, but I wasted 4 minutes looking at the instruction book of the car where I couldn't find it. You just feel around, you can find the port, plug it right in just very easily. No screwdriver or anything recognized, and it stayed in for 3 months. So it is not a difficult thing to do. But the point is that we're not stuck with any particular type. This will evolve over time. So after you've done that, you simply drive. And people forgot they were in the program until they got a billing in the mail or by email. In the future, we'll have automatic account access, so you can simply forget about it if you want to. Simply drive and not worry about it because your account's already being credited. Payment option is the same as for any other commercial transaction. By the way, the legislators involved, when we went before the committee, people came from the Transportation Committee and the Revenue Committees, and we went before the committee with the bill, and they were talking about their experience with the second pilot, and I kept hearing the magic words. It was simple and easy. That's what we wanted to see. In fact, I would suggest that is your objective, to make it simple and easy for the motorist. Because if you've got everybody saying it's simple and easy, you're very close to being able to make this a mandated program and solve your revenue problem for road system in the state of California. Okay, so how does it work? You have the payer who has a mileage reporting device in his car, in her car, and it reports the miles driven and the fuel consumption to the private sector account manager. And then the account manager then will send an invoice to the payer. And in the state of Oregon, some people will get a net refund because it's just one flat rate, and some motorists will get a deal. Okay, that was intended by the Oregon legislature. Why? Because the state senator, who was very sensitive and prominent on this issue for decades, and I agreed on this point, that the biggest opponents to a road usage charge tended to be people with fuel-inefficient vehicles. And we couldn't understand why that logic was backwards. So the thought was, let's build a flat fee into our pilot program, they'll get a fuel tax refund, and then they'll get it. So it's built into the law so that some people, although the limited number, only 1,500 of the vehicles can be below 17 miles per gallon, it's still something that will be experienced in the program. Then the vehicle owner will pay the charge to the account manager, and the account manager will then remit the net to the state treasury, and it'll show up in the state highway fund after that.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I have a couple questions, and I've been kind of holding,
Sure.
but I can't hold anymore. I thought
Nobody hold back.
First of all, I thought that the original intent of the Oregon, Alameda County slip, of the state of Oregon's program was to apply a pilot or apply a system to cars that got 50 miles per gallon or better.
Yeah.
It seems like your program has kind of expanded way beyond that. What happened?
Well, that bill didn't pass, the one I talked about. Okay, it was to make a mandate for that group of 55 miles per gallon and above, and it didn't pass. So that decision about who the first mandated group will be is a later decision by the legislature. They may choose every vehicle at a given date and beyond. They may choose a type of highly fuel efficient vehicle, but that's for a later decision by the legislature, and that is simply not the case. We're doing with 5,000 volunteers now.
Okay, and then, a couple of very simple questions.
Yeah.
First of all, if I ever check out a county car and I want to go fuel it up, in the old days I had to punch in the mileage and then the pump number and all that. Now all I have to do is pull into the pump, shove the thing in there, and squeeze it, and there's a reader on the fill on both nozzles, so when they connect, I think they then do a data load and get the information as far as how many miles the vehicle has gone and all that. Why don't we just have manufacturers do something like that?
Well, the state of California has an easier time imposing requirements on manufacturers than the state of Oregon for those kinds of things. We simply couldn't do it politically in the state of Oregon.
Okay,
And
so that's why you need us, right?
Well, there's a lot of reasons we need you, but
It's nice to be needed.
But that kind of reporting could work. Okay, you're imposing a requirement on how many service stations in the state of California. So plus electric vehicles don't do that. They can charge up at home, so it's kind of tricky. And part of our new system was to address the electric vehicle issue, which we considered electric vehicles to be more prominent. We don't know how prominent. We wanted to capture them because they're not paying any at least usage charge for road use.
And then the questions get simpler as I go, and maybe a bit more parochial. I've never really thought about this, but when I go up to the lake on the weekends during the summer, I'm filling up my boat, which essentially I'm paying into the gas tax. And so how will that happen in the future if I go to fill up my boat?
Well, the boat issue is a separate issue. It needs to be addressed, I suppose, but it's not the critical issue.
Well, it would be for me, I guess. The reason I look at that is, and so what happens? You send the state of California saying, I just bought 75 gallons of fuel. It was for a boat, therefore the user fee doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Give me my money back. And then if the state of California believes that's the way they want to do, all of a sudden all these people that have been filling boats and paying into it, they're no longer paying it.
Well, the boat's not going to have a mileage reporting device on it, so it's only the vehicle that's going to pay. So you're not really paying for the boat.
But I am now.
Well, you wouldn't be.
No, you're not.
You can get a refund for that, but it's
why
go through
am
a
I
process.
not? If I buy a gallon of gas, then there's the gas tax.
You can get a refund.
Now? Oh, geez, I need to talk to you.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem for the road usage charge.
Okay.
Okay.
I've never heard of it.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, keep going.
I'm getting closer to the end anyway. I want to talk about a couple of important issues. Building political support. It takes a lot of interaction with others on this topic to go forward. Legislative involvement. I'm glad to see 2 state legislators on this advisory committee. Testimony before the legislature. Over the, 12 years on this, I've testified well over 40 times for the legislature on the various iterations. It's very important that the committees that are relevant on this understand what's going on. So I testified in front of the Transportation and Revenue Committees many times. You have to have the backing of the governor, the commission, and the DOT leadership, and many, many interactions with interest groups. And public engagement is very critical. Let's talk about that. Rima went into communications. I think they're doing marvelous work up there in communications up to this point. We're going beyond that. We haven't been able to go deep into communications with the public up to this point because we didn't have a policy adopted by the state. Now we do with Senate Bill 810 passing in the state of Oregon. So we're going to go into deeper analysis and advocacy for the program for the first time. Rather than have me guessing about what to say, we're going to use focus groups, surveys, interest groups, a bunch of online stuff, and we are going to learn exactly how to present this with the proper argument and the proper language. As I said, when I went around the state 10 times, I said the same thing 10 times and got completely different reactions. So the arguments are there. They're good arguments. You have to make them in the proper way. You've got to learn how to do that. So communications is critical to do this well. We have hired a public information officer whose job is the road usage charge program only, to be able to figure out how to sell this to the state of Oregon. We want volunteers. But we also want the policy accepted in the state of Oregon. So right now we're in phase 2, educating and building awareness of the program so that we can activate volunteer recruitment in May of this year before the July launch. But it'll be an ongoing effort for many years to try to communicate why this is needed in the state of Oregon, exactly what we're doing, and why the policies were adopted should be accepted by Oregonians. And if we learn something new, we'll make an adjustment. Okay. So where are we now? We have signed the contracts with the account managers. That is complete. 3 of them have signed up. They've signed, on the commercial side, a market contract, which is important because what that means is a firm that wants to come in later will get certified that their systems and technologies meet our requirements and standards, and then they'll go sign the market contract. Market contract will not be renegotiated because it's been negotiated with the market. It'll be a very easy entry into the system. We'll continue to certify the technologies and business practices from now until through March. That's the current process. An operational trial will begin April through May to ensure all systems are go for the launch in July 1. As I mentioned earlier, we'll issue the permanent commercial account manager procurement documents, we hope, by the spring, with the cooperation of the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium. Of course, communications will be continued. Okay. This book, you may have access to it. It explains how we got to the policies that I mentioned that are in my presentation today. It's pretty extensive and detailed. You might find it useful. I applaud you with your efforts. Good luck for the next year or two.
Thank you very much, Jim. Do we have any more? Yeah, Marty?
When you quoted the cost as a function of the size of the pool of participants, was value-added services assumed to be driving those costs down, or was that model independent of the presence of value-added services?
Yes, value-added services in our model. Well, the model could have been done several different ways because you check some factors and it spits something out. But so the size, the model I talked about on the slide, that application assumed value-added services. If you had a government-only system, it would spit out a different answer. I don't have the results on those with me right now. We kind of left those behind. We saw they were too high.
Okay. I have another question for either speaker. I'm interested in the fact that we are directed to develop a pilot program which recognizes diversity in classes of travelers and rural and urban and so forth. In these two states, Washington and Oregon, my presumption is that there would be relatively few volunteers who are driving electric vehicles because they would be volunteering to pay for something that they're getting for free now. I don't know about volunteers who are truckers and how both states addressed the diversity of road users who include goods movement and motorcyclists and so on. I'd like to know more about the discussion which led up to your choices with respect to these many different classes of travelers who use roads.
Yes. Of course, our program will not have trucks. It's 10,000 pounds limited, okay, 10,000 pounds and below. And it's only vehicles with four vehicles in touch with the ground. So motorcycles won't be involved either. The only real demographic that's in the bill is only 1,500 of the 5,000 can be below 17 miles per gallon, and then the next 1,500 can't be more than 1,500 for 17 and below 22. The remainder can be above 22. Our objectives is to have, as the state DOT, is to have a good cross-demographic with geographic representation and everything else. But that was not the requirement of the bill. And so we're merely trying to pursue that broad demographic. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's important. The legislature only gave us one way to coax people in. If they're getting getting a gas tax refund that exceeds their mileage charge. So the other tricks is up to us, and it's not easy to do.
For Washington as well, we're not looking at heavy trucks, so it's 10,000 and under is what we're looking at. We are not as far along as them. Our request right now to the legislature is to move into the design phase of the demonstration where those kinds of questions have to be answered. So we don't have the details ironed out yet as far as will motorcycles be in or not. I mean, I'll say anecdotally that the Electric Vehicle Car Association in Washington is highly involved in our steering committee and quite excited to participate. So we're hoping we will find electric vehicle drivers in the pockets of test sites that we will be able to bring in. The questions do exist around how we incentivize people to do it, and what is that really to get people in? That may be a challenge. So those are the things we need to think through, hopefully in the next year as we design this, to think about our strategy of rolling it out and making people want to get involved in it.
Okay, Lee, you had a question?
Yeah, so this is also for both of you, and it's probably not a quite fair question since we're all in the room thinking about road usage programs. But I also have gotten from your presentations that the whole process of operations of, and this was especially clear in your presentation, is way more Rube Goldbergian than collecting, gas taxes at the pump. And so the thing that I'm trying to understand is why the emphasis on road usage when the fundamental issue, I think, at least for California, is simply a revenue, issue, right? And then when we frame everything as a road usage question, you had a great slide, the key policy issues for the per mile charge system. It seemed to me that those policy issues all really had nothing to do with, the revenue problem. They didn't seem to have anything to do with, the question of popularity of taxes or not, since one way or the other you're charging people. And it didn't also seem to have a whole lot to do with the stability of the revenue flows for supporting long-term projects. So it feels to me like there's sort of a funny mismatch between road usage as a solution to the revenue shortfall problem, when the more straightforward and potentially cheaper way to do it is simply to, raise money, just like through, I know you probably don't have an income, one of these states doesn't have an income tax at all, right? But there are various ways that you could raise the money that don't have anything to do with this complicated technological infrastructure of tracking cars. So it seems like, and one of the things that really gets complicated in the whole process then is this whole fairness issue, that because once you say, well, we're trying to approximate the pain to a household based on the cost that they impose on the road system, well, you are asking to try to do something that's sort of messy and difficult and is only going to be done in a very granular fashion anyway. So it doesn't feel like a particularly well-matched solution to if the issue is really revenue shortfalls.
Mr. Chair, if you acknowledge or observe the problem of the fleet moving to highly fuel-efficient vehicles, which is the policy of the federal government, and the state of Oregon and probably the state of California, I'm not as familiar, then you end up in a situation where if the pay-as-you-drive notion, which has been in place since Oregon enacted the gas tax in 1919, that withers away. It disappears. And so you can raise revenue by other means. But if you want the policy of the state of California is to have the users pay for the road system, we're going to have a tremendously unfair and growing unfairness, where some vehicle operators will pay a lot for the road system, and others will pay very little or nothing for the road system. And I submit that for a while anyway, it's going to be the affluent that drive these technology-laden, highly fuel-efficient vehicles. And the secondary market will pick up and that's the less affluent.
Right, but I mean,
fuel-efficient vehicles. So you're going to have a tremendous societal imbalance that's going to grow. And so how do you address that situation?
Right. But, the regressive tax, to the extent that a lot of the excise taxes tend to be regressive just in their structure, the traditional tax policy ways of dealing with that are to give tax credits, to graduate, tax brackets, impose proportionally greater, burdens on the affluent, et cetera, et cetera. And there are ways of doing that don't seem to require.
Well, what you'd have to do what you suggest, which is find a revenue system outside a road fee, would essentially abandon the user pays principle, which has been fundamental to the road finance system for nearly 100 years in the state in the United States. So that is take it up. But that is a big, big change.
No, I recognize that.
Let me go a little further, though. Probably the simplest way to have a road usage charge or not have a road usage charge. If you go with a flat fee, everybody pays the same, which is like a license fee, which people do pay. Just shift completely to that and forget usage whatsoever. That was raised in the state of Oregon and rejected easily. The legislators were not interested in that for the simple reason that means grandma who drives to church and the grocery store and maybe over to see the grandkids and doesn't drive much at all on the road system, subsidizes the traveling salesman. And that's in your head as a state legislator. You say we can't go there. It's got to be, the burden has to be on the users, and that's why they opted for the policy. Now I know this sounds complex, and if you were to analyze about any electronic commercial transaction now, really deeply analyze it, you're going to see tremendous complexity. A credit card transaction is simple for you. But to build that system with all the electronics they do, automatic account verification immediately, that is a load of work. So when you see that, you don't see the other side of it. And that's what we want to get to on a program like this. And so the back end might be complex, but there's competition, improving it. The front end, as the legislators experience, simple and easy.
Marty, you wanted to weigh in
comment on that? In the teens, 19, 18, and 20, and so on, the proposal was for states to fund highways with tolls. Mm-hmm. And tolls are more akin to fees than they are taxes. But it was discovered, of course, that in collecting tolls, we would have to build toll booths all over the state, and the cost of collection would be very high. We'd lose the revenue. The motor fuel tax was adopted as a fee for the use of the roads. It's now eroding, and we are, in fact, in California, we have, I think it's 24 counties have sales taxes earmarked for transportation uses, and that is a shift toward general funds. But to those of us who study transportation economics and revenue, it's not like other taxes. It's a fee. It's for the use of the roads. And that's very fundamental. I don't think the legislature directed us to consider whether we would prefer to replace the financing of our road system with general funds. They directed us specifically to talk about a new form of user fee.
Yeah, and I'm not a transportation guy, so I don't come at it from that. I just look at the way that we fund lots of things, and we don't fund them on a use basis, and it's not necessarily rational to. It's like why, we don't require, only parents don't pay to send their kids to public schools. The funding for public schools is on a different basis because it's understood that it's a benefit to everyone. And calculating who gets, the benefit of the University of California system is, difficult to assign. And I would contend that the value and benefit of a good state transportation system and a mass transit system is also like the education system, and impossible to simply say that just because you don't own a car, you are not benefiting from the use of the road. So to the extent that, I realize some things just cannot be changed, but to the extent that we think that the system was broken such that it's necessary to abandon the gas tax, that to me that's also an opportunity to question the fundamental assumption about it being a pay for driving or some sort of a use concept in the first place.
Article 19 of the state constitution, though, tells us that the motor fuel tax goes into a separate fund. It doesn't go into the general fund, and it's only used for transportation. And the whole gas tax swap, which Stephen Keck talked about, where a sales tax was eliminated and converted into an excise tax only in the last few years, was to protect the gasoline taxes paid for the use of the road users, because the governor had declared a fiscal emergency and had taken that for other purposes. So the issue you're talking about has a long history and it's very contentious. I see the merits of your position. For example, when we imposed the gas tax, something like 1 out of 12 families in California owned a car. So it was, it was the user was literally paying. Today, virtually every family, not the poorest, but most families do own a car. So everybody who drives also could be financing it through general fund, but that's not what we were empowered to do, I think.
Well, the beauty of this task force is that we have this diversity of input without experts in transportation and with experts in transportation, and I think it's very refreshing to hear these ideas. So I think it's good to have all of this kind of commentary. And Mr. Finnegan.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that point, I think we've got some sort of feedback going on. I think that what I'm hearing in this is two things. One, clearly our committee here has a charge, and it is to look at the road charge. But at the same time, I think partly what you're reacting to is the inherent complexity and cost of moving from something that is relatively very simple and long established and everyone's used to something new. And I think what was alluded to there is the future, depending upon fuel efficiency or non-gasoline cars and all the rest, is likely to necessitate a change. The question then becomes when, how, and how to deal with all of these complexities, of which that's our charge. That's what we're asked to weigh in on. And so I think your reaction is a natural one. I think it's a reaction that the public is going to have. Some years ago, this idea was floated in California briefly, and it got a huge backlash in the media. We had a number of AAA members contact us about it, saying, you better fight that thing. And we would talk to them about the issues and how there's a need for more money and all of these things. And invariably, they'd come back and say, well, if you need more money, just raise the gas tax. And in the short term, that may be the easiest thing. In the longer term, that's what we're here to try to figure out.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add a perspective to that.
Please, Rima.
Okay.
Yes.
I think more broadly, I think that's a great point you raise that we transportation wonks lose sight of sometimes because we're so deep in the weeds. But I think today where we're different from historical times is that we are pressured to meet a higher test of justification when we go to the public and ask them to pay more or differently. In light of technology and privacy and security concerns and ongoing management around that, as we introduce technology into our taxation system, it becomes imperative that we be able to even more strongly make the case for the connection between a tax and the uses of it and how it will be collected. And at least in Washington State, we have constitutionally bound directives around the gas tax. If this is indeed going to replace that or supplement it, we will assume and advocate that it also should be dedicated. We see it as a very direct correlation between the user and the tax paid, and then the dedication is an important piece of that to ensure that people know when they're paying their taxes, whether it be more or the same, it is going to the intended purpose. It's been a tougher and tougher job to raise taxes because in the past, and we've done this with our old motor vehicle excise tax, which was based on the value of the vehicle, those dollars were put into a pot and used broadly for education, public safety, local uses. It started getting further and further away from what people thought they were paying for. And as our infrastructure costs go up and up and up into the billions commonly, and we all fall terribly behind on our maintenance and preservation, and our roads are crumbling nationwide, our costs, we're digging our hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And so our needs to address, our ability to address those growing needs gets harder and harder and harder. And so we see a direct correlation, and we feel we have to make that case to the public in order to get their support for it. to think about an income tax or other forms of taxation, while maybe easier because it's in place, pulls us away from that proxy or that correlation, which then makes it more difficult to justify what we're doing with it and to be held accountable for how we're utilizing those funds on the tail end. So,
I think it's going to maybe be, pun intended, multimodal in the discussion that we have and in the solution that we have, that maybe it's a combination of everything, just as we would have to have different options to give the user in the pilot program. Maybe also it's going to be multifaceted when it comes to how to pay for it, i.e., when somebody buys tires now, or somebody buys a TV, there is a charge, or a light bulb, there is a charge for disposal up front. Maybe there's going to be that kind of recommendation for an electric car. Okay, so there are going to be some assumptions if we try to generalize how many miles an electric car is going to use, but maybe it needs to be a combination of that and that disposal or user, the person that wants that electric car that doesn't want to put the gadget in there to find out just how much of the road he is using. So look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Well, this has been outstanding, getting both Rima Griffith and Jim Whitty for your perspectives and all of the time that you've put in. Obviously, nearly 15 years of work, and Rima, what you've done in Washington. Clearly, we can benefit from that. So that's outstanding. I'm endeavoring that we end up ending this meeting a little bit earlier than what's on the plan. And so what I thought we would do is we move into agenda item number 9, which is kind of the work plan development, and talk about some of our next steps. And we have a very compressed timeline for this committee to identify and design a pilot program, and therefore a very aggressive work plan needs to be developed. And so each meeting, the committee is going to get an opportunity to hear a policy issue. We'll have detailed technical discussions on those. We'll come up with some clear direction from each of you back to staff as they move forward. And what the idea is to take each meeting and build it upon the last one. So as we move forward through this, we'll end up getting almost like a technical report, if you will, out of each meeting. And the idea is we'll be writing the report as we go. Of course, you'll all have the opportunity to continue to study that, but I figure these individual technical reports will be the basis for the committee's recommendations for the pilot program. So we thought that would be a logical way. I know Carrie's going to give us a little snapshot of this preliminary work plan, which is on the screen either here in the dais or on the screens above us, and just to kind of give us a snapshot of what's to come.
Yes, committee members, this is just kind of a preliminary work plan that we put together looking at what Washington and Oregon has done, and we plan on taking your comments and discussion from today and fleshing this out to a more fuller work plan at the next committee meeting.
Well, that was short and sweet. I love it. Any questions or comments on the work plan development? Marty?
How will the actual proposed demonstration be written? It'll be written by staff for our review and comment? Will there be consultants involved? What is the actual production process to come up with a product?
Well, it's envisioned that the committee would put together make policy decisions, very high-level policy decisions and recommendations, which would then be put into a work plan or a recommendation that would go to the California State Transportation Agency Secretary, in which they would then flesh out the more detailed system. So they'll be doing more of the concept of operations. They would be doing more of the system design. That would not be done at the commission staff level.
Sorry, who's going to be doing the design part?
Well, committee members, we will be bringing back to you the policy questions that you'll need to answer in developing recommendations for the design of the pilot program. And so as you make these decisions meeting to meeting, staff at the commission will be formulating, working through Caltrans, bringing back to you in the following meeting, what were those decisions so that you can actually see them in writing. And those decisions, I think, as we go forward, will build on each other as you make additional policy decisions. So, for example, in Oregon, they have various methods. If you, narrow down a few methods that you think would be viable, we may need to bring more speakers in to have you flesh that out more. But there's going to be policy decisions that you'll need to be making regarding each potential method, as to privacy, as to data, as to all of that. So what our goal is, given the timing that you have, is to at each meeting, as you do make certain decisions, that we're bringing that back to you so that you can see that at the following meeting. And so that you'll be able to read it. Things look different in print, and we want to know if this is capturing your intentions.
And keep in mind, we'll be able to change things down the line. Just because we might agree on something in March, we might feel a lot different about it in August. So those are the variables that we get to work with. It is your task force. It is for us to make these decisions, and staff will report and write up what our votes end up being. More than likely, everything's going to generally be by consensus, but as our operating rules state, we certainly can vote on things as necessary. So that kind of gives us a sense as to where we're going. It's certainly going to be an interesting ride along the way. We are going to be bouncing around the state. There's going to be a lot of folks interested in what we're doing. We're going to try to centralize our communications through the California Transportation Commission offices. Will Kempton, who had to leave to attend an AGC event over south of San Francisco, will act as our primary spokesperson. We'll also be providing media context and information for each of the task force members as we move forward, just to make sure that people are all being kept as informed as possible. You might find groups or organizations that you're affiliated with that might want insight or information. Fact sheets are going to be developed. If you do have things like that or inquiries, please send them over to the CTC staff. They can be accommodating. I envision we'll end up having canned PowerPoint presentations and talking points that will help guide us in taking the collective efforts that we've done as a task force as we move along in providing information to the public. Everybody from the governor to 120 members of the legislature in both the Senate and the Assembly, there's a lot of people and throughout the state that have a lot of interest in where this is going. And I would imagine you haven't seen anything yet compared to the interest that this task force effort is going to encompass. So I think we've had a very informative first meeting. Again, our friends from Oregon and Washington, thank you so very much for being here today as well. I want to move to item 10 on the agenda, which is any other matters members of the task force might have public comment. We did receive one email from the Sierra Club. We'll make this a point of the public record and have it distributed to each of you, so you will have that. They weighed in on issues looking forward to participating in this public process this year and indicate they'll submit formal comments in the future. I understand from staff we do not have any other speaker slips from any members of the public. Is there anybody in the audience that feels they want to say anything or add anything for the good of the order? Seeing none, any members of the task force?
Just one point of clarification. So CTC staff will then be sending out a little bit of clarity on the schedule. I want to make sure I have the right dates, and especially for the next one, and locations and times of meetings, so we can make schedule and travel and other plans.
Yes, we will send out an email with the schedule that was agreed upon today, as well as the meeting location for the February meeting.
And as I said, logistically, it's my intent that we're a little bit more casual than this day as format. But again, as you heard at the beginning, it's so fast getting this whole effort together, and CTC was here yesterday. It was easy to have this location. But I hope that we can all do this in a more of a roundtable casual format.
Question, is there anything like meeting minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we'll have meeting minutes, as well as the meeting will be posted on the website.
Any other questions, comments for the good of the order? Well, seeing none, I'm pleased to say that we're adjourning 56 minutes early. Thank you so very much for your attendance today. We're adjourned.